Okay, so apologies for not posting any content over the last week or so. I've had a lot going on. But I will start with this, the Women's Euros. It's been a fantastic tournament so far, not a single goalless game, and we've only got two matches left. So that is got to be a record in any international tournament, not a single goalless game in the Women's Euros so far. That's fantastic. No penalty shootouts so far either, which is also pretty fantastic. Crowd records broken. A semi-final record broken for goals scored. Group stage records broken again. So all in all, I've been quite impressed so far with the tournament. I have one gripe, and I think this is just football in general. The delayed offside rule. Possibly one of the more infuriating rules because we have seen a player go through, the risk of injury is increased because the goalkeeper or the defender will come across. There will be a challenge for the ball. The flag is obviously the delayed flag, and it increases the risk of injury unnecessarily, which is one of the more frustrating rules that I think international football currently has in place is the delayed offside rule. So there's been some tinkering with rules and interpretations of rules over the last 3 or 4 years. We can debate how well some of those rules have been implemented and how badly others have. VAR has been quite instrumental in this tournament as well. It's worked effectively. However, I still think there's improvements that can be made to the VAR system. Absolutely. I think there's improvements that can be made to VAR for the World Cup in Qatar. I think they are tinkering with certain things in this tournament for the men's World Cup in Qatar at the end of the year. I think that is important that they get that right. I think that the delayed offside, there's been a lot of criticism for it. A lot of ex-players and commentators are frustrated with it. I think a lot of fans will be when a player gets injured seriously as a result of a delayed flag for offside. That's I think the main gripe for me. It is that. But otherwise, I've been pleasantly surprised by the tournament. It's been a better quality than I expected. However, in women's football, the gap between the top teams and the lower teams is still there. And I also think that the footballing world rankings are flawed as well because England destroyed Sweden last night, the second best team in the world after the US. England went into the tournament ranked 11th, and they put four past them. And while I only saw the first half, I will say this: I think there's a flaw with the ranking system and how world rankings, are applied and how they're calculated. This has been argued uh, for a long time in international sport, especially team sports. World rankings are flawed. Fundamentally flawed, um, as last night proved. World rankings are very fundamentally flawed, in my opinion. England ranked 11th, Sweden ranked second in the women's game, and that was a very lopsided scoreline. But I think that some nations have disappointed me. Norway were very disappointing and not getting out of the group stage. I was very disappointed with Norway and Denmark. Iceland are a solid outfit, a sum of all their parts. Then obviously got a very small player base and a very small population size to draw that player base from, both men and women's football. And they always seem to overachieve. But Denmark and Norway, for me, um, they when I come to do a review of the tournament so far after tonight's game, they are the teams that have disappointed me the most. Italy as well. I was very disappointed with them. So some teams, yeah, didn't live up to expectations with their history in the game and how strong they are in the women's game. Very disappointed with those three sides. Northern Ireland, they were clearly the weakest of the nations there. It was very visible that they didn't have a lot of go forward and were overly defensive minded. I think that they should have had no pressure on them. They should have just gone for broke, really. Um, yes, the viewership figures have been exceptionally impressive. They're record viewership figures, I think, for a women's Euros. They're not quite as close as a World Cup, for viewership figures. But the Women's Euros, yes, records have been tumbling. Attendance records were smashed before the end of the group stage. They've had the highest ever attendance as well. And of course, the finals at Wembley. And of course, England are in the final. So expect good crowd numbers on a Sunday, especially if the Germans get through. If the Germans lose against France, it will be interesting. But England-Germany would be a fantastic final to look forward to. And the viewership figures are backing that up. So, yes, I still see the same comments online. And yes, when Ian Wright and Gabby Logan are part of the punditry team, I think it's very, very good. However, when it's the other punditry team, yes, I do agree that hasn't come across very well. I think that I try and avoid watching the pre-match build-up and the half-time discussions and analytics and analysts, especially with even in the men's game. I think it's not as good as it used to be. The breakdown of the play in the first half, the build-up. I think the negative coming out of this is some of the pre-match build-up. I think that I would agree is not great. I like Ian Wright's enthusiasm. It doesn't matter who's playing. Ian Wright's enthusiasm is very, very infectious. He truly is a football fan. It does help that he's an ex-player, but he truly is a football fan, passionate about the sport game so much. I like Ian Wright when he's in FA Cup coverage, men's World Cups and Euros. Getting Ian Wright in the punditry team and the analytics side of it was a very good move by the BBC. I think that's plus points there. But I do have, yes, I would say the quality of sports journalism is not as good as what it was 10, 15, 20 years ago. I will agree. In general, I think the quality of sports journalism has declined massively over the last 2 decades. There is no disputing that. I will agree that the presenting teams they put together and the narrative that is being discussed is not. I've stopped watching the pre-match build-up. Yesterday, I literally just tuned in just in time for kick-off. Yes, I fell asleep in the second half. I shouldn't have. But there's the reasons why I haven't been posting as I've been working outdoors in this heat wave that we've had, including the 2 hottest days, or the 3 hottest days of the year so far, but the 2 real hot days we had last week and the hot day we had last month. I have been working outside in this heat. I am pretty much exhausted by the end of the day. Also, on a personal note, unfortunately, my friend Johnny was battling cancer, sadly passed away. So there is that as well. So I've had some personal stuff to deal with. Work's been very, very busy, and at the end of the day, I've got a balance of work life and this. And hopefully, at some point, this channel does become monetized, and then it does sort of pay for itself. If that makes sense. I have to admit, I wasn't in on Saturday. I was out on Saturday at a memorial event for another friend. Big get together of some old mates that we hadn't seen for a while. So Saturday I wasn't in. I had a good day Saturday though. So a good day Saturday, but I wasn't in to watch the match. But I will say this: I think personal stuff and work stuff aside, the matches I have seen, I've been very impressed with what I have seen. Some of the goals scored have been fantastic. Some of the defending, and I echo this across the board in both the men's and women's game. Some of the defending has been poor, and it does sum up an issue that the sport currently has. Football in general. The pace of the game has definitely increased. The goals per game average has definitely gone up. The fact we've not had a single goalless game. But when you say some of the goalkeeping has been poor, you could say the same in the men's game. Some of the calamitous goalkeeping we've seen in recent World Cups and Euros in the men's game. Look at that Slovakia game against Spain, for example, last summer. Dubravka had an absolute mare in goal, absolute shambles in there. So when we say some of the goalkeeping's been poor, that's across the board. These are professional. They've got professional goalkeeping coaches. They've got professional. These managers are professional. Some of these managers are managed in the men's game. So that comes down to coaching. Now, if that's your best available goalkeeper, you've got to coach and improve the quality of their decision making, which a certain amount of coaching can do. There's a lot of that emphasis on the player as well, but the defensive side of it, the defensive systems, that's coaching. When you are forced to play a player out of position, and you know you've got to you know, put a player in like the Swedish left back last night was not a left back. I think they were a midfielder who was filling in. You have those training sessions in the build up to that next game. If you know your starting left back or your starting right back or your starting defensive midfielder is not going to be there, and you are forced to play a player out of position, you have to train those systems in those training drills and in the analytics breakdown and working out on the whiteboard and position, and that comes down to coaching. If you are being selected for international level, okay, in any sport, if you are being selected for international level, which is a step above your domestic club team level, you should be adaptable and flexible to fit into a defensive system. If your team plays with that defensive system, attack is different, but defense is where coaches really earn their pay. The Portuguese could not defend, could not defend. The Spanish could not defend. We've seen England had a few wobbly moments in the last couple of games, but for the most part, haven't conceded a lot of goals. So clearly, their defensive systems are working. Germany, I don't think have conceded a lot of goals. I think Germany and England have conceded the fewest goals in the tournament so far. That tells you something. Whereas Norway just fell apart. They fell apart badly against England. And I was not expecting an 8-0 scoreline. That was not anticipated. It was meant to be a very, very close game, looking at the head-to-head record, Norway's history within the game, especially in the women's game as well. Norway's defensive systems just fell apart. That's on coaching. That's on putting the right players in the right matchups with the opposition. The split, I think, a lot of the top players are playing in the German and English and French systems, and the Italian systems, which are professional. All the Italian players are professional. All the Scandinavian players are professional. The top leagues are the German and the English league systems. I think Italy and France and the Scandinavian countries are the next batch of domestic league systems that are professional. And of course, the US has got that funding and investment, and some of the players do play over in North America, which is important. But some of the Portuguese players going forward, yes, they've got great technical ability. They're very good in attack. Defensively, can't keep the ball out of the net. Hopeless. And again, that comes down to coaching. If you know you have major weaknesses in this area, some of the defending has been poor. Like Beth Mead's goal last night in the first half, she falls into a pocket of space, and what the Swedish defenders were doing was marking zonally. And they just stood still. They stayed in their zone. They didn't engage the attacking player or the player in space. They stayed in their quadrant, their space, their square, whatever, 4x4 box they're standing. Zonal marking is the weakest form of defensive structure. Man marking generally is the way to go, or positional marking. Zonal marking is you either want to block the shooting channels or the passing channels or the running channels by putting bodies in, and that's positional marking. Man marking is when you're literally hugging the opposition player. You are like on them like a rash. Zonal marking is the worst defensive system you could possibly have, because you're not blocking the passing and running channels. You're not blocking attempts on goal, and you're stuck in your little radius around you. There may be a 4 foot, it may be an 8 foot radius, depending on how you set up. The split of pro, semi-pro, and amateur. I think all the knockout teams are all fully professional. They've got that fully professional coaching setup and funding through their domestic football associations. and they all play in the top leagues. It, in regards to the goal, oh yeah, absolutely, it's on a Sunday, so yes. But I do have to be up early Monday morning, so I will attempt. Hopefully, it doesn't go to extra time penalty because if that's the case, I'm not going to get any sleep. Yes, I'll be watching the final. A Sunday night final is a very special thing. Um, I'll be watching the semi final tonight because I think France could upset the apple cart with the Germans. I think this German side, while they've had a very good tournament, they're not as dominant as the German sides that have gone before. And while they've laboured in a couple of games to get over the line, their group stage was very similar to England. No goals conceded. They didn't score as many, but they didn't concede it. But I think the French, with the way they smashed the Italians so easily, a first half blitz, I would think that this German side may be tested. I think while they are historically favourites in the women's game, if this is a men's semi final, it it would be a 50-50 toss up. You know, which team really is in the mood, which team really actually has played well. What we've seen with Germany in the German system in general, both men's and women's, is they're not as dominant and as structured as they were 10 years ago. But the German production line of talent is there. I would say that the way the French have been playing, they do leave themselves exposed defensively. The Germans, I think, have a more rigid formation structure defensively. But I haven't seen enough of the Germans. I don't think I've actually watched a single German or France game yet, so I can't really comment on what I haven't seen. But the way the French played in the last Euros and the last World Cup, I do think that they have massively improved in the last 5 years. And depending on how you assess who is favourite, I would say this German side still isn't a finished article, and this French side is definitely massively taken steps. But I think a better final being England Germany, I think that would probably get more viewers than an England France final. I'm just saying. I think that the history of the rivalry there, dating back to the 1966 final, the the history between the nations at international level in football, would would I think you'd probably get a bigger viewership for the final if Germany get through. Whether it's a better game if Germany get through to the final is another thing. But I think defensively, the two, you know, if Germany get through, that would make a lot of sense defensively. The two best teams. Um, the thing is, the Germans aren't blowing sides away. Whereas the French, even the Swedes have pumped a lot of goals in, but England have backed up their defeat of Norway and their defeat of Northern Ireland. They had a slow start against Austria, but that's expected. They found their feet against Norway and they haven't looked back. I think Spain gave them a real challenge, and I think Spain was their toughest challenge so far. But the way they just annihilated, and I'm saying this, annihilated the Swedes last night. That's scary. The first half was very end to end, very open, and you could see where there are some vulnerabilities if you go at each other with pace. But if you look at the pre-season friendly England Holland, first half they were a little nervy at times. They destroyed them in the second half, and I don't know. I think again I won't be watching the pre-match build-up. I'm just going straight into the game at 8 o'clock or 5 to 8 of the anthems. The group stages, I had enough of the pre-match build-up when they said the England team was too white. I'm sorry, you've got several mixed race and Afro-Caribbean players in the squad. You've got several openly gay and bisexual players in the squad. If that is not an inclusive squad, I don't know what is. And you know, you've got to put your best starting 11 on the field, barring injury. That is our best starting 11. Why tinker with something that's winning? Um, Richardson and Lopez playing Birmingham about the same as Bassini. In regards to the Birmingham City situation, um, I haven't really been following Clubland in this transfer window in this off season. Quite honestly, um, even though obviously football's dominating the headlines because of De Jong at Barcelona and what's happening there. Barcelona find the money to sign players um, and you know and pay players. But the Barcelona transfers this summer are raising a lot of eyebrows for me because this is a club that's got 1.3 billion in debt. They've had to sell their media rights and and sponsorship rights, and they can't now sell the stadium to the council to then get it gifted back for free, which is what they've done in the past. They're owing players unpaid wages. They're owing former players money. They're owing current players money. They're owing current and former coaching and administrative staff money. They can't even afford to pay their squad. Where are they getting this money? The signing bonuses and the transfer fees for all these transfers. Huge questions have to be asked of Barcelona right now in regards to what's going on there, because they have no money to purchase anyone. Um, there are current players on that squad and past players from that squad who are owed money. Um, so we'll see what happens. I don't even have them qualified yet for the Women's World Cup. You think they should be favourites? Let qualification be completed because Italy won the men's Euros and didn't qualify for the men's World Cup in Qatar. So until the qualification process is complete, I can't see there being any problems. I would still say the US system and the US are still one of the favourites. The Canadians have had a massive resurgence in both the men's and women's game. They obviously won the Olympic gold. The Canadian women's system is pretty strong right now, but they have to be one. If they keep playing this style of football and they keep winning matches the way they are, we'll see what happens. Yes, I agree. The best 11 should be on the field, and you know, I think that again, that's bringing a political agenda into the squad selection. I don't like it, um, and then the BBC has faced a massive backlash of criticism. Yes, you want to be as diverse as possible. I think the squad represents the diversity within the women's game. The fact that some of the Afro-Caribbean players aren't starting, they don't they're not obviously showing something on the training ground, or they're not, performing in training, or they are understudies, or their form going into the tournament. Yes, they were good, but someone was better. The best 11 should take the field, regardless of background. Yes, that's no, I don't like this identity politics being played. I don't like it. It's very divisive. It causes more problems than solutions. And the BBC has been heavily criticised by a lot online. But then I see the other comments that are pretty sexist online as well. So the cave trolls are still out there, of course. There's been a lot of complaints raised to UEFA about social media conduct online. Yeah, it's ridiculous. I mean, the French squad is a very diverse squad for background. The Italians have got a very diverse squad these days as well. Some of the Scandinavian nations, even Iceland had a black player. So you can see the diversity in the women's game is coming through, and it's more acceptable being a gay or bisexual player in the women's game. The men's game has a long way to catch up, and the sport in general has a long way to catch up. I haven't even got onto what's happening with Manly Sea Eagles with their Pride jersey, even though it's been a Women League round this weekend, and the criticism that the Manly Sea Eagles organisation in the NRL are facing, and how seven, senior players, refuse to wear the jersey, have withdrawn from the matchday squad tomorrow. And then some of the reserve grade players who were called up also refused to to agree to wear the jersey. So Manly Sea Eagles may not be able to put a team out tomorrow, but we'll have to wait and see. And the way that's been handled. So, and bearing in mind, the Manly Sea Eagles had the first ever openly gay player in the game. Um, the fact that Daly, Cherry Evans, and Des Hasler had to front the media yesterday in a very awkward press conference. There's no hiding the awkwardness of that press conference. They were clearly uncomfortable with the questions that were being asked. They were clearly put in a position by their CEO and the club's board that I do not agree with. It appears that, you know, the consultation between the board and the owners and the CEO and then the playing group and the coaching group was very poor, and it's backfired, and they're still forging ahead with their Pride jersey, even though it's women in league ground. So that's it. And women in league ground's been a fantastic round in the NRL for many years. A lot of money is raised for charity during July as well. Um, and yeah, the Birmingham City situation, yeah, that is a concerning situation. We could have another Derby County on our hands. The stadium issue still hasn't been resolved. The required repairs to St Andrews haven't really gone anywhere. But as I say, it's the off season, and I find this time of year meh. I mean, we've got the Commonwealth Games starting tomorrow. We've obviously got the Rugby League World Cup coming up in a few months, literally a couple months away. We've just had State of Origin. The resurgence of the England cricket team under Brendan McCullum has been fantastic. There's a lot of positive feel-good stories coming out of, you know, out of sport at the moment, and then you get these negative. Look, the BBC has been clearly criticised. There is clearly a an issue there, and and I think it's fair to criticise the some of their coverage. I think their actual match day coverage has been very, very like the actual being the sole broadcaster has been very, very good. It's free to air, brilliant, fantastic. Same with the Rugby League World Cup in October and November, that's fantastic. The Football World Cup split between ITV and BBC, fantastic. The Commonwealth Games, I mean, I'm looking forward to that as well. Um, I'll try and catch as many events as I possibly can. Um, they've been building up for this in Birmingham for years. There's been a lot of infrastructure work done in the West Midlands in recent years in preparation for this event, this 10-day event. And yes, I want to see a good Commonwealth Games, and I want to see some real good stories come out of the Commonwealth Games. I think we can all agree on that. I don't think it's got as big a build up as it should have. I think it could have got more of a build up, but it's sort of the Women's Euro has been delayed by a year, and the Commonwealth Games it's created a scheduling clash for a couple of days. So yes, the Commonwealth Games could have been bigged up a bit more and given more publicity and um, more exposure in the build up. It could be better advertised. I think the Commonwealth Games has gone under the radar. And considering how the last couple of Commonwealth Games have gone with a lot of criticism aimed at organisers and the coverage and some of the faults and flaws with the Commonwealth Games 4 years ago and 8 years ago, I think yes, the rail strikes don't help. That's caused a few headaches. I think the cost of fuel hasn't helped. But it's still going to be a great event. The West Midlands is definitely going to buy in. When I was going through all my club histories earlier in the year, in the spring and earlier in the summer, I've done a lot on the West Midlands clubs. And what I find very, very interesting about the West Midlands in general is in recent years the lack of sporting success. So having a major international sporting event like the Commonwealth Games in the West Midlands, I find, is a positive, a massive positive shot in the arm for sport in general. And we always seem to discuss, parts of the world or certain cities or certain sporting locations that have underachieved in professional sport. Um, doesn't matter if it's in the UK or across Europe or North America or South America, certain areas that have underachieved. And it's true, there are certain cities or certain regions of countries that have underachieved in a sporting sense. And in recent decades, yes, the West Midlands is one of those areas. I think the last trophy won in the West Midlands was the League Cup by Birmingham City. So it's been a very, very long drought for sporting success in the West Midlands in team sports at least. Individual athletes have done very, very well. Um, and the West Midlands has a great history of producing some really great talent. Um, but yeah, certain cities haven't delivered, considering the talent that's come out of some of these locations, like Bristol, for example. Like Bristol, I think Bristol and the West Midlands, as two regions of the UK, have underperformed sporting wise, um, and that's something that does need to be looked at as to why. The West Midlands, several of the founding clubs of the Football League come from the West Midlands, Aston Villa and Wolverhampton Wanderers, for example, at Birmingham City, another historical club. And without Aston Villa and Wolves, especially Aston Villa, you don't get the Football League. Aston Villa is the driving force behind the foundation of the Football League all those years ago. And they're one of the most successful football clubs in the history of the game. The fact they haven't won silverware for such a long time is a travesty, considering their history within the game. And then other clubs like West Brom and Birmingham City, I was, especially Birmingham City, very surprised by their lack of success. Really surprised by Birmingham City's lack of silverware. Yeah, the England shorter formats, especially the T20s. I mean, there are massive issues still within English cricket that need to be addressed. Um, the again, while there's a couple of ODIs and T20s with free to air coverage, both men's and women's, Test cricket's still behind the paywall. The ECB is still persisting with this 100 format. They've now sold the rights to that to Sky. So a loss-making venture going behind a paywall. That's a good idea. So English cricket still has massive structural issues, massive problems with encouraging youngsters to take up the sport. What we call an aging fan base, very similar to baseball in the US. Major League Baseball has had its problems. Now, Major League Baseball returns to the UK with its London series next summer. We're still waiting on the teams to be announced. Major League Baseball, again, much like cricket, has got an aging fan base. Younger fans, sports fans, are not interested in baseball in the numbers that they were, let's say, 20 years ago. Percentage of fan base, average age, it's a shrinking fan base in that sense when we talk about the average age of fans, average disposable income of fans. Major League Baseball, much like cricket, has the same issues. So youth participation is not as high. Fans in attendance, average age, higher. The average salary of a fan is of the higher bracket. So it's exceptionally expensive to go to baseball. Exceptionally expensive in comparison to some of the other major leagues in North America. The Scottish cricket scandal, it follows on from the Yorkshire scandal in the last year. Really troubling. Really troubling. It does show a massive problem within the sport in Scotland. I think the sport of cricket in general has got an image problem where it's seen as an upper class or upper middle class, elitist sport, which it really isn't because so many working class kids do actually play the sport. Um, I would say cricket has lost a generation of fans because of the TV deal that's currently in place for domestic Test cricket in the UK, and just domestic international cricket. So when we're hosting international cricket, one days, T20s, and Test cricket, when we're the home team, when teams are touring us, we have definitely lost a generation of fans. And this is where the 100 format comes in, which it shouldn't require a gimmicky format to encourage fans back. Very simple solution. The ECB have gone too far down the road with their greed, and unfortunately, the TV deal has led to this point. The agreements that are in place between the ECB and the broadcasters have led to this point all these years later. Um, but yeah, cricket has got a lot of problems, and they've obviously recent years bubbled to the surface. Um, and it is troubling. This is, yet another scandal that is rocking the sport within 12 months. This is on the back of other scandals that the sport internationally and globally has had for a very long time. But cricket is definitely a sport in crisis. It just doesn't want to admit it's in crisis. But it's much like baseball. Baseball has been, scandal has followed baseball around in the US and Canada for years. And then with a constant scandal and negative headlines, it does obviously impact on parents going, do I want my kids playing this sport? Do I want my kids watching this sport? Do I want to watch this sport? Do I want to spend my hard-earned money, going again? Um, it will be interesting to see what a Scottish sports broadcaster has to say about it. What I've seen on the news is limited. I will admit, I've only watched a couple of interviews given in regards to what's going on with the Scottish cricket situation. I don't think it's had the same impact as the Yorkshire scandal, um, even though I think it's worse in the Scottish Cricket Board than in Yorkshire County Cricket Club. But it's at the top level of the sport in a country. Um, but this is a sport that's lurching from scandal to scandal globally. We've seen player misbehaviour, match fixing allegations, corruption allegations at the highest level. We've seen issues with team owners in the IPL being done for bribery and there are definitely massive issues and cricket has lost a generation of fans. And I'm in my mid thirties now. I will be when I turn 33. I will be in my early mid thirties. And I think it's safe to say yes. I think my age group, so the 30 to 40 bracket, when we were kids and teenagers, when Michael Vaughan was captain, and you had Mark Ramprakash and Butcher and Hoggard and Darren Gough and a younger Freddie Flintoff and Harmison and all these players playing. Yes, I think we're the last generation to really buy into the sport in numbers. And yes, I think the ECB and cricket in general, when the IPL was on free to air coverage, that was fantastic. It actually encouraged people back into the sport for a brief period about 10 years ago. And then those TV rights were snaffled away. So I think cricket's definitely got its broadcast rights wrong. I think mixed rights are the best way to go for any sport, having good balanced mixed rights between free to air and subscription TV. I think that's, or subscriptions in general. I think that's a good way to go, is to balance it like that. I think the ECB and the other cricketing boards around the world have definitely got their broad. I mean, Australian cricket's in crisis with their broadcast rights. I do think that will people buy back in the same numbers? I don't think so. I think cricket's actually damaged itself quite badly. The main London series, I'm going to have to look at the Major League Baseball website. I'm going to have to look on their press releases. Bearing in mind, since they announced they were coming back, they have had a lockout. They have had a new CBA. And you know, I do think that there are baseball's got a lot of problems. They're not coming in 2025, which I find really interesting. I do. 2023, 2024, and 2026. So there's 1 year they're not coming, which I do find interesting that they're skipping a year. Um, they've got a 5 year CBA in place. I can see there being further unrest between the players' union and the league, and I can see there be a further breakdown in relationship between league head office, the owners, and the players. Uh, it was a divided players' union and player base that eventually agreed to the terms that were on the table to end the lockout. The CBA, a collective bargaining agreement. So basically, if you're a union rep or a union member in your workplace, you have collective bargaining between, your employer and the employee. That's basically like, your workplace directives and things like that. So basically, the CBA lapsed in December. The players' union didn't want to renegotiate their collective bargaining agreement with the league, and the league owners went, "Okay, we'll lock you out." Now they could have played on without a collective bargaining agreement. They could have actually played on like the CFL are doing in the Canadian Football League, which is the Canadian version of the NFL. They're playing this season without the CBA, which is very, very dangerous. Um, the the situation with baseball is they have damaged themselves with their lockout. The players' union were actually very divided. The players, in the end, begrudgingly accepted the offer that was finally put on the table. They did. Neither side negotiated their agreement for structure of pay, entry level contracts, bridge contracts, free agency, the age you are allowed to enter free agency, unrestricted free agent, restricted free agent, that kind of thing, revenue sharing. The issue with baseball is there's no salary cap. Now, if you look at every other major league in the US and Canada, and I include Major League Soccer, Major League Rugby, and the fledgling rugby league that they have going on the East Coast, they all have salary caps, soft or hard. Now, the Major League Baseball has a luxury tax, so the wealthy teams can just. How many times they've had? I've done videos on this. It's on my Major League Baseball playlist. They've had 2 lockouts and I think 7 player strikes. This was the second longest labour stoppage in the history of the league. They, I think that the 1990 players. No, was it the 94 lock? Yeah, I've done videos on the labour unrest within Major League Baseball. They're on the Major League Baseball playlist. Feel free to check them out at your leisure. I do discuss the previous stoppages that Major League Baseball's had. I think it's had the most labour unrest in the 4 major leagues. Now, the NHL has had 3 lockouts and a player strike in my lifetime since the 90s. I think the NFL has had issues in its history as well, as has the NBA. Um, there's been 2 lockouts and I think 7 player strikes. Some of them have never actually impacted on-field play, so no games were lost. But the 94-95 lockout costs a World Series. I know that was a player strike. The 1990 lockout and the 94-95 player strike were the 2 previous longest stoppages the league has had. This one is now the second longest out of 3. Now, the damage done to the image of Major League Baseball is they've had 25 years of no issues, and then suddenly 26 suddenly 4 months. It just dragged on. There was a lack of good faith in negotiations. Now, I can see the fragile piece between the players' union and the players, which there is some division there as well, but I think they're all talking from the same hymn sheet, just from different directions. And the league is there now. How long Rob Manfred is commissioner of Major League Baseball is another thing. I think his position could be weakened. Um, the, the playing group and the players' union aren't massive fans of Rob Manfred, who is currently commissioner of Major League Baseball. I think the handling of the Astros cheating, sign stealing scandal was poor as well. I've been heavily critical of the handling of that situation. Now, I'm not a massive baseball fan. I always admit that. But I have viewers of the channel who are based. I think there's one of our moderators, Dan, is a collegiate NCAA baseball player. And there's a few other baseball fans who are viewers of the channel. So I've done baseball content with those guys basically, and I think looking at the history of the labour unrest within the league, it's very striking how between the 70s and the 90s, it was almost I think on average every 2 to 3 years there was some kind of labour unrest, a stoppage or a lockout, and games have been lost and revenue has been lost. In my lifetime, there's been 3 stoppages of Major League Baseball. In my lifetime, that's once a decade on average. That's once every 10 years, but or just over once every 10 years. But I will say this: I think we have a greater chance now of further player strikes and lockouts going forward. Major League Baseball is in a very precarious position. And how long Rob Manfred can remain commissioner, that's up to the team owners, because they're his boss. And people think Roger Goodell and Gary Bettman as league commissioners are bad. I forget who the NBA commissioner is or NBA president, but Gary Bettman gets a lot of heat and hate from NHL fans. And Roger Goodell gets a lot of criticism from NFL fans. Some of it's justified. I think some of it's unfair. But I will say this: Gary Bettman has stabilised the NHL, and the NHL has grown massively under Gary Bettman since he was implemented as commissioner. He's the only commissioner in the league's history. That tells you something. There's stability at head office. Rob Manfred, look how many commissioners Major League Baseball has had in the same time frame. It's ridiculous. Roger Goodell, again, the NFL gone for a lot of commissioners. These are not popular individuals. But Gary Bettman comes out and says this: if I'm not getting booed by fans when I award the Stanley Cup, I am not doing my job right. Now, some of the decisions the NHL has taken, yes, you could argue, haven't worked. But Bettman's brought stability. He was also involved in implementing the salary cap system in the NBA. The issue with cricket is there's too many competing T20 tournaments wanting to sign the same small pool of players. Yes, you could argue that. On the other hand, women's T20s are enabling female cricket players to make a good living from cricket. Yes, you can argue that as well. But I think cricket as a sport is lurching, much like baseball, as I say, from one crisis to the next. And negative headline to negative headline to negative headline. So there's a constant stream of negativity coming out of the sport. And I've got books on cricket. I'm a big fan of the sport, but I think the way the sport is governed and the way the TV rights are handed out leaves a lot to be desired. I think the direction of the sport is taking is concerning. And yes, cricket is one of those perfect. It's that perfect sport for corruption to unfortunately worm its way in. We've seen it. We've seen the damage it's done. I'm going to have to move. I'm going to sit up. My back is. I've got a bit of a dicky back. My mate's kid used me as a climbing frame on Saturday, so I'm a bit bashed up. I got beaten up by a 3-year-old. So there you go. But no, yes, cricket definitely has a lot of problems. It's unfortunately the situation that the ICC finds itself in is it's got all these governing bodies. It's got to try and get round the table. The T20 domestic competitions now become very, very lucrative. That's spearheaded by the IPL. There has been a debate over media rights, broadcast rights, both domestic and overseas, and we have seen a lot of scandal. both before COVID and since the initial shutdown in 2020. We've seen cricket lose a lot of money in the last 2 years, and we've seen viewership figures well below peak. Now, peak viewership figures were in the mid 2000s globally uh, for TV viewership. So we have seen some really interesting trends, both good and bad. Now, the growth of T20 is fantastic. I like it. I think it's a good format. It's a great format to get young fans interested in the sport. We still have the test format, and I'm a big fan of the day-night test format. I think that is the way to go to really boost the profile of test cricket to a wider audience as well. I think that is a fantastic idea, and I think that's what test matches should be, all day, night, because then you get rid of the bad light delay. Therefore, more play can be played on a given day. Yes, the success of the World Cup in 2019, only one match from free-to-air TV in this country. I don't know what it was like overseas in places like New Zealand and Australia and South Africa and other countries, but here in the UK, one game on free-to-air coverage, that's not good enough. If that's a Rugby League World Cup, if that's a Rugby Union World Cup, if that's a Football World Cup, every match is on free-to-air TV. So there is an issue with the broadcast rights that cricket currently has. That's down to the ECB and then the ICC to figure out. And some of the commercial decisions that the ECB, for example, we use that as an example here in the UK, have taken, yes, leave a lot of head scratching and questions to be asked because they've signed these massive TV deals with Sky, for example, and BT Sport. Where's all that money gone? Because if why would cricket then, if they've got all these lovely TV deals in place that are worth hundreds of millions, why did the ECB then go straight to government and go, can we have a handout? We need financial support. If the Cricket World Cup was such a success that it was meant to be in 2019, where has all that money gone? That is a question that still needs to be asked. Every sport that's got these massive, mega TV deals, and sponsorship arrangements, broadcast rights, and media rights, and streaming services, the question does have to be asked. Where has all that money gone? Because the players can only earn so much with centralised contracts. Where's the money gone? And it's the same kind of concept for rugby union. And questions have been asked about the financial state of rugby union for a very, very long time. Of course, rugby league, we know about how weak their TV deal here is in the UK. In Australia, they've got a very strong media rights deal that's worth a lot of money, and the game is very profitable in Australia. Whereas in Europe, the game is not as profitable. There's a lot of issues. There's a lot of infrastructure issues. There's a lot of money issues, and clubs are struggling financially. Whereas in Australia, the opposite is the case. More clubs are making money than losing money. Only a handful struggle financially. Over in Europe, a lot struggle financially, and there's question marks there. When it comes to cricket, the format's going to miss out on ODIs. I think in general, if you get the coverage right and the investment right and balance it across the three major formats, you should have no problem, I think. No, I think the way cricket is sold. I think they've sold the England Australia rivalry to death by having the Ashes. I think every 2 years they've oversaturated the market there. They've oversold the product. It's now reached a point where it's lost that luster and that magic of being every 5 years. And there used to be a 6-test series back in the day. You have 6 tests, not 5. So bear that in mind. I think they definitely overdone it with the Ashes on the cycle it's currently on, and that's Cricket Australia and the ECB commercially doing that. So I think that's actually harmed the sport rather than helped it. I think some of the decision making taken at the governance level in the sport has been poor, and Same with rugby union. It doesn't matter if it's domestically, internationally. Just rebranding it from the International Rugby Board to the World Rugby hasn't solved the problems. Augustine Pichot, I think, did talk a lot of sense. He didn't win that election against Bill Beaumont in 2019 following the World Cup, but his platform, what he was saying, has rung true. Rugby union in Wales domestically is in financial meltdown. The Southern Hemisphere crisis financially. Now, while the top 10, top 10, top 12 nations, top 14 nations are pretty set in stone, haven't changed much in the last decade. There's a reason why New Zealand have slipped to fourth. There's a reason why the old Super Rugby format has collapsed. There's a reason why South Africa have a lot of concerns going forward, and why they pulled out of the old Super Rugby format and joined the European United Rugby Championship, similar to the Super Rugby format with the Italian, Scottish, and Irish and Welsh clubs. But there's concerns in South Africa with the rugby union structures. There's a concern in New Zealand about the money side of things, and in Australia. Massive concerns about the finances. And the only league I think that can benefit from the mess that club rugby is Major League Rugby. Growing the game in the US and Canada. Now, the US and Canada, well, the US can still technically qualify for the World Cup in the final repechage round, but Chile have got through to their first World Cup, so that's fantastic. I don't think they win a game, but I think in rugby union there are there's massive issues financially, and that's been well documented since the rise of professionalism in the mid 90s. It hasn't fully worked over the last 27 years. There were concerns about the professional side of rugby union in the early 2000s, especially in Wales. We've seen these salary cap breaches at Saracens and Leicester in the last couple of years, which have been very well documented and discussed, and we all know about. And now we've seen the collapse of the Super Rugby franchise system, what it was, what it is now, with the Australian, New Zealand, Pacific Nations, Super Rugby, South Africa joining in the European Rugby Championship of rebranding Pro 14. Same problems still linger there. And there's a big concern about the financial future and the future of the Welsh teams. I do think the tier 2 and tier 3 nations definitely have that gap has closed. There's definitely been great growth there. Is it sustainable growth? Is the game financially sustainable? That's the question. But a lot of sports are in financial mismanagement, basically. Financial mismanagement is definitely an administration and governance is a big thing. The US have got into the repechage as well because they failed to beat Chile. So I can see the US winning that repechage tournament and getting to the World Cup literally as the last team to qualify. Both games are very close, but yes, I think going forward, I think yes, the Major League Rugby format is definitely going to help grow the game domestically in the US and Canada. The Canadians failing to qualify and the Americans having to go to the final repechage tournament says that there has been some issues there. And again, that comes down to the Major League Rugby being separated from the two unions, both the Canadian and the US. They're separate. So US Rugby and Rugby Canada do not have direct governance over Major League Rugby because it's a franchise model league that is team owners own the league. I think it does have a delayed benefit. I think it does. I think the game is growing. But I think more Americans would probably enjoy rugby league more than rugby union because of the pace of the game, the simplicity of the rules, and the speed of play. During lockdown, when the NRL and the AFL from Aussie rules resumed play at the end of May, beginning of June in 2020, so just over 2 years ago, American sports fans, or North American sports fans, because we'll include Canadians, were bored as. They were bored. There was nothing on. And suddenly there's no European football being played. Some of the European leagues did not resume, like Belgium, for example. They called it. They said, no, we're not going to resume play. And then the NRL and the AFL resumed play. There's been a massive growth of interest in Aussie rules rugby league in North America because these two leagues, which do have overseas TV right deals, were being played. And now there's a massive interest in North America in rugby league and Aussie rules. Yes, there are South American, mostly Uruguayan and Chilean players and Brazilian players playing in Major League Rugby. Yes, so they are sort of handing an advantage to some of their tier two rivals. And Uruguay and Chile have already qualified for the next World Cup. And that tells you something that these smaller nations with population size and player base, they're mostly footballing nations, remember that, have definitely developed their structures, their player base. They've increased their player base. They've now got professional players playing in leagues in Europe and obviously Major League Rugby. And that quality level has taken that step up, whereas the US has stagnated and Canada have gone backwards. And that is a real surprising thing for me because the league is based in the US and Canada, yet the US have got to go to the repechage tournament, and the Canadians haven't even made it to that stage. So there is concerns about the structures within the US and Canadian systems and the direction the sport is taking in those two countries. But I think down the line, yes, the quality will massively improve. I think that the bigger the league gets, with the more eyes on the product, it does. And the fact that the US will be hosting both the men's and women's Rugby World Cups coming up within the next decade is fantastic. They've got to build towards that. So if they fail to qualify for this World Cup next year, that could have massive knock-on impacts. They need to qualify because they're going to be hosting. Yes, South America, rugby in South America has always been quite popular with the middle classes. Che Guevara used to play rugby. He was an outside centre. So if you know your revolutionary history of the 50s and 60s and communist revolutionaries, Che Guevara liked rugby union. He was a rugby union player. I would definitely say, especially in the last 10 years, rugby union in Canada has gone off a cliff. The last 5 years has been accelerated. Rugby union in Canada is in crisis. We can all agree on that. It's not in a good place. And a lot of questions do have to be asked about what has gone wrong with the game in Canada. The women's team is fantastic. Women's setup in Canada is fantastic. They're one of the best teams in the world. I think they're the third best team in the world. So the Canadian women's team is great. They've got good structures on the women's side of things. On the men's side, it's apart from their sevens program, they have problems. So there are questions to be asked about the structures currently in place. The fact they've only got the Toronto Arrows in Major League Rugby, they don't have a second Major League Rugby franchise at the moment, although that could and should change in the coming years with the expansion of Major League Rugby. And they've got to face a battle with, firstly, the CFL as a domestic-only league, the CFL. Then they've got to face a battle with Major League Soccer, where you've got Montreal, Toronto, and Vancouver as the locations where Major League Soccer is played. Then you've got the NHL. They've got to battle with the fact they've only got one Major League Rugby franchise at the moment. It's only one fully professional team. They've got to battle with the fact that they've got a CFL, a fully professional sports league, based solely in Canada. And then you've got the MLS and the NHL, where Canadian teams are quite good. Admittedly, a Canadian team hasn't won the Stanley Cup since '93, but we've had Canadian teams in the Stanley Cup final in my lifetime since '93. And then you've got MLS, Toronto, very successful side in the MLS, Montreal and Vancouver are pretty solid sides as well. And so you've got these established leagues that are there that are making money. The CFL is not, but Major League Soccer and the NHL are. But CFL could be vulnerable to rugby union getting a foothold. But again, questions have to be asked about Rugby Canada, the direction the sport has taken, the fact they haven't qualified for the World Cup for the first time ever, the fact that Uruguay easily handled them, the fact that Uruguay easily handled the US as well, and the fact that even the US haven't qualified yet because they've got to enter the repechage tournament. So there's still a chance the US can qualify, a very good chance. They'll be favourites in that repechage tournament. But that is a concern that the US have stagnated, gone backwards a little bit, a bit of regression, and the Canadians have just gone off a cliff. There are big concerns there, yes. And this is at a time when the US and Canada will be co-hosting the next Football World Cup in 2026. And of course, the US have also will be hosting the Rugby World Cup, both men and women, at the end of the decade. So it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out. And yes, the Uruguayans and the Chileans especially have taken advantage of Major League Rugby to improve the quality of their player base, to improve the fitness of their players and their skill set. And some of their best players are now playing in Europe. And they have taken that next step. They have progressed. They have improved. Whereas the US, I think, have stagnated and Canada's gone backwards quite badly. Then you have to ask of the administrative side and the structures off the field when it comes to governance, funding, pathways, player retention from encouraging young kids not to play ice hockey, not to play CFL, so Canadian football, not to play basketball with the Raptors, for example. When you are looking at young Canadian youth, I think I read a stat somewhere that it was between 70 and 80%, depending on the generation, depending on the year of birth, of Canadian kids, adults, have played ice hockey at some point. 7 out of 10 kids will be ice hockey will be their chosen sport to play for at least a year. That is a pretty damning stat. 70% of Canadians have played ice hockey at least once in their lifetime, or at least for a year. They need to, try and encourage that remaining 30% of kids who don't play ice hockey to want to play, rugby rather than CFL or football. And that is a problem because Canada's co-hosting a Football World Cup in 4 years' time, because the Canadian men's national team has qualified for the first World Cup since '86, because the Canadian women's national team have won Olympic gold. Suddenly, loads of kids want to play football, or they'll call it soccer, but suddenly, loads of kids bang into football. So, rugby union's got a problem. They definitely have a problem in trying to encourage that pathway and encourage kids and young adults to want to participate in the game. Whereas other sports have done it very, very well. Ice hockey's done it very well for over 100 years. The CFL, Canadian football, done it very, very well again for over 100 years. And rugby union is falling down the pecking order and is lagging behind in that interest that younger fans will have. And then trying to entice younger fans to want to participate, join in and play sport, etc. So Rugby Canada is in a very difficult position. On the US side of things, yes, it is surprising that they're going through the repechage tournament to get to the World Cup. They'll be favourites for that repechage tournament later on in the year. But as I say, they should not be in this position themselves. They should have beaten Chile. They failed to do that over the two games because of the aggregate score put together. And they had themselves to blame. No one else but themselves to blame. and then you can look at the coaching setup and the structures, and is Major League Rugby actually truly benefiting the national setup? Does there need to be a better coordination between Major League Rugby and the national setup for player pathways? And we'll see. There's always that club country debate in every sport, but rugby union seems to have a lot of it. But there we go. What else can we discuss? What else? Oh yes, the spending cap in F1 has been lifted, been raised because of rising costs, and that's been a big talking point in F1 circles, and quite a hot debating topic. Some of the smaller teams have argued that they, cannot afford to throw the money around that the bigger teams like Red Bull, Mercedes, and Ferrari can, and that is with justification. That's a fair justification on that discussion. They were the three teams arguing for a raise in the budget cap. All the other teams on the grid were against the raise in the spending cap in F1 because they just can't financially compete, and it does create that imbalance again. Now, Liberty Media, I think F1 is definitely at a crossroads. Some of the regulation changes have had some negative impacts. And then that big crash at Silverstone as well. Questions have to be asked about why a car managed to flip over the barrier. This follows on from the Romain Grosjean incident and some of the GP2 accidents as well that we've seen in recent years in regards to the chassis and some of the regs that are in place, and some of the aerodynamic packages that are in place. So Liberty Media is facing a mixed bag with F1. The way last season ended and how that all came about, race to survive. A lot of fans have been heavily critical of that Netflix docu-series. Other fans seem to enjoy it. The amount of American races that we currently have on the calendar, will have on the calendar, is a hot topic as well. So there's some good and bad coming out of F1 at the moment. And argue you've done some good things and some bad things, and some of the arrangements that are in place. Bernie Ecclestone was given charge of F1 at the time when those agreements were signed long term. Some of the discussions about the number of races per season, the sprint race format, qualification format, dropping races from the calendar, the race fee, the track organizer race fee as well, some of the sponsors, the question marks over the future of the Monaco Grand Prix. There are a lot of discussion points that F1 is facing right now as a motorsport, as a Formula in motorsport. They're not the only sport, I think, going through at a crossroads. There's growing calls for fans to boycott the Qatar World Cup at the end of the year as well. So FIFA again is starting to feel the backlash of awarding the World Cup to Qatar. This is possibly the most controversial World Cup we have possibly seen since, I'm going to say, the 1978 World Cup in Argentina. Would be my guess. And there were some debates about should they have gone to Argentina in '78, considering the civil military dictatorship at the time, and some of the things going on in Argentina back in the '70s and early '80s. And this has got to be the most controversial World Cup of my lifetime. And again, there's been a lot of fans, especially in some of the pre-season matches, putting up banners, a lot of fan protests in regards to the Qatar World Cup. And I think that's justified. I think there's a lot of justification behind some of the fan protests that we're seeing and some of the the pushback we are seeing against the awarding of the World Cup. My concern is the quality of product we're going to see and how many tickets actually get sold and how many fans actually get out to Qatar to global fans, that is, who aren't Qataris, to actually watch the games, and what the attendance is going to be like. Because this women's Euros, for example, have been fantastic. Record attendances, record viewership figures on TV. This Qatar World Cup could be one of the opposites. This could be a real um, black eye, so to speak, for FIFA. This could be a real risk for FIFA's reputation if the World Cup doesn't have good viewership figures, doesn't have good crowd numbers. This could really blow back quite badly on FIFA and damage the reputation of an already vulnerable organisation following on from the revelations of the Sepp Blatter and Platini and the corruption and the FBI investigation 6-7 years ago. This is an organisation and a governing body under a lot of pressure anyway, um, and so are UEFA, quite frankly. So we will see what happens in regards to the Qatar World Cup and what comes of it. But yeah, so anyway, thank you very much for watching. I thought I'd do a little brief live stream. I do apologise, obviously, for not having any content up in the last week or so. There's been a lot going on away from the channel with work and personal stuff. It's been a great privilege to make content for you guys for so long. We're very, very close now to 1,000 subscribers, so hopefully that little milestone gets passed soon. And yes, Germany France game, I will do my best to stay up. I'll do a good match review for that. I think it'll be done in the 90 minutes, and I think it could be a very high scoring game. Looking at how Sweden and England went at it in the first 20 minutes, very open, very end to end, open play with lots of counter attacks. I'm looking forward to this Germany France game. The French are just as free scoring as England. The Germans have proven they can score goals as well against reasonable opposition at the women's game, at least at their level. So I'm looking for a high scoring game that could be quite open. I don't expect a cagey game. Looking at how the fact there's been no goalless games in the tournament so far, I'm going to have a look at goals per game average to see if it's gone up, and I'm going to compare it to the last tournament. I will do the same for the last 2 Euros in the men's game as well. We are going to do a comparison. We're going to look at goals per game and see if the average has gone up, because I believe it has in football. Definitely goals per game average. I'm going to have to look at some of those advanced stats at times. There we go. Thank you very much for your questions. Really appreciate it. And I'll have some more content for you very, very soon.